Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about Elixir, Phoenix, and LiveView. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hey Frederick, very nice insight, thank you, posted on a different video. I saw the benefits of using TypeScript too. Yeah, because I like TypeScript. All the time I get troubles with type errors and dealing with third-party libraries. Anywho, I'd love to hear your opinions on Elixir and Phoenix. They recently introduced a quite interesting approach with the so-called LiveView, which would virtually allow you to build web applications without JavaScript. Do you think it's going to represent a good contender to a JS-based web app in the future? Thank you and have a nice weekend. Thank you. And you have a nice weekend and like a nice life and just have a nice everything. Uh, so I had a look at LiveView, and this is just based on my very narrow understanding of it, but let's just back up and explain the basics of what LiveView actually means. So the basic idea of LiveView is that, and this is why this person is saying that you don't actually need JavaScript to use it, it's practically that you have a persistent connection between your server and your client. And what you actually do when you interact with the page is that you're actually sending a request for a diff between the HTML state on your browser, in your browser, and the server. In other words, if you want to expand, like if you want to change a tab or something like that, in a similar way to an SPA, right? You're going to actually request the HTML that is needed in order to represent the new page on that new tab, and just have that sent in, and then the LiveView will actually update that for you without any JavaScript. Because traditionally, if you wanted to do that, you would do it with JavaScript, where you would fetch the data on the new page from the client, from the server, and then you would have JavaScript on the client just build up that state just on the client. Now, the reason why what I told this subscriber was that I don't think that this is going to work for large-scale development, and it's one part because of what myself, like my first thoughts on this, and then the people behind Phoenix actually states as well that LiveView is not a good solution for animations, as an example, because when they're actually trying to run an animation, that's something that is actually happening over a period of time. That's going to be really tricky for you if the server is actually updating the DOM for you. So animations is a tricky thing, which is that's a big no-no immediately. Like, that's a red flag. If it's an issue to run an animation, then the solution is already inferior. There's actually there's no application virtually no large-scale system that is animation free. You're certainly going to be able to work around this fact. You're certainly going to be able to have workarounds, but that's not a good thing, because it's a big part of front-end development to be able to do different types of animations. But the thing that I had an issue with was that this creates a situation where if you're diffing between, first and foremost, you have a persistent connection, which basically means, well, I'm not saying a WebSocket, but that's practically what you have. So every single application you're building has a persistent connection. That's not great. That's actually, you're actually now putting more work on the server than if you're just sending JavaScript. You're absolutely, and this is something that they stress as well, the initial page load time is potentially much better because you're just sending HTML, and that's a very good thing. But at the expense of that is that your actual consuming resources while the application is running is actually higher, because you're actually doing work, or you're maintaining a connection all the time, instead of which is the case with JavaScript, only when the user requests new information. And that's a difference right there. So that's a trade-off. Now, the other part that I find that is going to be very tricky with this is the scaling problem. And the scaling problem, at least from my perspective, is that if you this in practice means that your server is stateful now. It's not a stateless server anymore, because if you're going to diff the HTML between the client and the server, you're going to have some type of state on the server. It's not because it needs to know what the state is, so that it can diff it against the new state that it's going to get. So that is, at least from my perspective, a bit of a problem, because that means that you need to make sure that the request that is coming from the client, from the browser, hits the same server every time. And that is a nightmare. It's not fun to do that, because that basically means that if you have three different, let's say that you're doing the classical reverse proxy pattern where you have a single entry point or like a single gateway into your system of a bunch of different services, you really need to make sure that everybody's hitting the right service at all times. Now, Elixir isn't designed to have an absolutely amazing uptime, but I can just imagine how bad that sort of thing could be, because think about it potentially, if you're hitting one service and your state of the UI is on that service and that goes down, you're pretty much screwed, because if that goes down, you're going to lose the state, which is going to make potentially, it could make a really weird create a really weird situation on the client, depending on the situation, right? And you can't just seamlessly continue sending them to some other service because they don't have the right state. Now, if this is resolved, who knows, that might be a viable option, but from my perspective, this seems to be it's a really different take on how to do web application development, and I personally don't feel that the benefits outweigh how different this is, and the differences are not, at least from my perspective, good. There are no because that's practically what the benefit is. Or what is the motivation for this? The motivation is what? That you have a better page load time. Well, you can deal with that in many ways that will be equal to LiveView in every single way, at least if you ask me. There is so much stuff that you could be doing while doing a traditional type of web application thing that will have you at the same, if you can even go I can promise you can go even faster than anything live you could possibly do, you can still do with JavaScript in many ways. There's so many patterns of lazy loading and doing above fold optimizations and so forth that you could do, and you probably want to do that in LiveView as well. So I'm not seeing that big benefit, but the consequence is that potentially you have a much more complicated situation in terms of what you can, you might be more restricted in what you can do, because one thing that you should remember as well is that JavaScript isn't just used for sure, if you're gonna make an SPA, you're gonna have would say a pretty hard time to do that with just LiveView. If you're just going to do a static application or something fairly simple, go for it. But you're still going to need JavaScript in some fashion, most likely. There's going to be like analytics scripts or ad scripts and other types of scripts that you're still going to need to include. So no, I'm not convinced. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just not convinced that this is something. I don't think that this is going to have much of an impact outside of probably Phoenix. I don't see this concept going anywhere. To me it's a very similar sort. It's a similar sort of situation as with Blazor, and the idea that using WebAssembly and building entire applications in WebAssembly is going to be something that's going to kill off JavaScript. WebAssembly has a lot of adoption and it has a lot of potential, but it's way too early to say that that's going to affect anything. It's still it's taking baby steps at this point, and for most companies it's a novelty thing that we hear about on the tech talks, but nobody's really using it except for specific companies. So what I want you to take away from this is that I don't think that LiveView is going to make it outside of Elixir or Phoenix as a concept, because it's not a new concept. We have had similar sorts of ideas, such as portal pages or things like that, which is could have potentially been part of the web standard, actually in HTML, but I think that the plans to implement it actually isn't. Either we have dropped them or they're not going to go any further. But that's also very it's an attempt to remove or reduce the need of JavaScript. But so far I've never seen any concept at this moment in time that is a serious threat to JavaScript, apart from maybe WebAssembly, but that's not going to happen overnight, and there's so many things that needs to happen in order for that to even be feasible. So I'm not convinced. If you want to use LiveView, and I mean, even if let's say that LiveView becomes a big hit, it's still going to be within Elixir and within the Phoenix framework. And Elixir is, unfortunately, I'm very sad to say, not the super popular language. It has some adoption, but it's nowhere near the sort of disruptive type of language that would be required in order for JavaScript to be seriously threatened as a concept throughout the industry. So not convinced. There might be benefits, but I would probably stick with traditional application development and like doing it the old-fashioned way, and then learning how to actually make this work really, really well, because there are practices today that will definitely give you the same sort of benefits LiveView is claiming to have. Have a great day.